Percy Jackson may be the ever-lovable, sassy son of Poseidon we've all grown to love over the years. But today, in honor of his birthday on August 18th, we are investigating the environmental effects on what happens when he uses his powers to fight the villain. We are breaking down today's video into 3 different stages: his minor effects, his medium effects, and his major effects. So, let's get started. First off, when Percy's using his power on a more minor level, he causes tidal surges. And for today's video, I'm going to be modeling these as meteor-tsunamis. Because you know, since the ocean or rivers or lakes don't just all of a sudden surge and have big 6-foot waves. So, typically, if we're seeing this at Camp Half-Blood in the lake, it's going to cause some disruption, but it's going to fade fairly quickly. But at the end of the lightning thief, he causes several waves to come and attack Ares or his boar, but at the very end of the battle, he causes a giant 6-foot wave, which is the exact size of a meteor-tsunami, to come and engulf Ares enough that Percy can stab him in the ankle, which is a drop of vigor flicking out, but enough to end the battle. What exactly is a meteor-tsunami, you may ask? Like tsunamis, they're caused by some rapid change in air pressure. Now, from the book, it doesn't seem like it would have caused that much damage, for 2 reasons. 1, because Percy doesn't really notice it, and 2, because when Ares gets stabbed, he lets out a roar and it clears all of the water within a 20-foot radius. But a wave this size, especially from the water washing back out to shore, it could have caused beach flooding, anyone on the beach to be carried away. If they were boats near enough, it could have caused boats to run into each other. And it could have easily affected the tides for the next couple of hours. And again, we don't really know what happens after that because Percy gets led away from the beach pretty quickly. But I would also like to point out that if Ares screamed and dispersed a 25-foot radius of water all around him, then that water could have been shooting everywhere. And we don't really know what the final damage for this one battle would have been. I'm ranking this one far from normal, but way above average for a normal 12-year-old. Oh, and one last thing before I forget, all the links from this video will be put in the description below. Okay, so we've seen what happens on a very low level. That's just him as a 12-year-old. What can he do by the time he reaches 17? That's right, we're going to Son of Neptune right now. When Percy's faced with an immortal, undying group of Roman soldiers, desperate to get their revenge and prove their worthy cause, Percy decides to cause a hurricane, and then when they're finally able to be killed, he breaks off the glacier that he's on and drops them all entirely into the sea. While Percy definitely succeeded in ending the battle right then and right there, just as they were getting to the point where they weren't sure if they were going to make it, it's time to analyze what kind of effects it would have had on Alaska afterward. But first, let's break down the hurricane. Okay, so first off, hurricanes start when warm ocean water goes in the atmosphere and meets with cold air, moving around rapidly enough that air begins circulating around it and getting it that spiral that you see. Considering that this is about June in Alaska, these waters aren't very warm. So he's going to be massively warming up the ocean air as he's pulling it out, raising the temperature of everything around him. Also, remember, he's on a glacier during all of this, so it's a big temperature change for a glacier. So they're in for a very slick battle. And for reference, the minimal these winds are going to be going in the very center of the hurricane are 74 miles per hour. So these Roman soldiers, they just keep getting knocked out and they keep coming back. So theoretically, this could have easily caused some glacial melt. But since it's not referenced in the book, we're going to excuse that for now. But what we're not going to excuse is that this would have definitely beaten at the glacier by having all that warm water fall straight on the glacier, having all the wind carve around it. That right there is definitely going to damage the glaciers. Okay, but now on to the bigger part, the whole breaking up a glacier. We don't really know how big this was, but it was big enough that his hurricane and his legion, entire legion, which, let's look this up. How big is a Roman legion? Okay, so Percy's fighting somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 ghosts here. And so if you're just going about 1 square foot per person, that's 4,000 square feet. That's about a 60 by 60 foot square. It's gonna be considerably bigger. So we're looking at minimum, probably about 40 to 50 foot radius. All this ice just hitting the water, creating a giant iceberg, and then accelerating glacial melt. And why is this such a big deal in Alaska of all places? Well, I'll tell you. Because Alaska, as of 2019, so just 9 years later, does not have any more ice shelves. Now, is this entirely Percy's fault? Far from it. But it definitely does make a difference in the warming of Alaska and getting rid of all their natural ice in general. So right now, I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10 because I can excuse many hurricanes, but I draw the line at glacial degradation. Okay, but now, it's the one we've all been waiting for. A throwback to the Battle of the Labyrinth where Percy literally caused a volcano to erupt. That's right, he caused Mount St. Helens to blow up. Before we get started, I will say that Rick gave Percy an easy way out. Last time Mount St. Helens blew up, it killed 57 people. Rick says explicitly that no one died. So we can give Percy a pass on not killing anyone by accident. However, let's look at the other effects. Before Percy Jackson blew up Mount St. Helens, circa 2008, the last major eruption was in 1980. And before that, the last major eruptions were in the turn of the 20th century in about 1921. If we're modeling this as an even amount of pressure added to the volcano for every year it doesn't explode, whether or not it's linear or squared or whatever, we can say right off the bat, it is a more tame explosion than what happened in 1980. However, there's about 30 years between 1980 and 2008, and there's about 60 between 1921 and 1980. So we're going to say that there's a little bit more than half the destruction caused in 2008 than there was in 1980, because Percy added a bunch of extra pressure and made the volcano blow prematurely. I'm going to read off exactly what Rick says about this eruption. They say they're still uncertain about further eruptions. The authorities have ordered the evacuation of almost 500,000 people as a precaution. Meanwhile, ash has fallen as far away as Lake Tahoe and Vancouver, and the entire Mount St. Helens area is close to traffic, yada yada. No deaths reported, minor injuries and illnesses include, so we'll get into those. Because while the last two haven't directly affected anyone's personal health, this one definitely does. It's going to be factored into the environmental effects. So one of the studies that I found on the effects of ash causing illnesses, going off the little last point that Rick Riordan added on, over the course of the next 4 weeks after the eruption, they found major flares in bronchitis and asthma, especially in people with chronic lung conditions. And that's where it seems most of the sickness came from. That ash distribution was in the very short aftermath of the explosion. In the 1980 explosion, it took 2 days for the ash to reach the East Coast, and it's estimated it reached around the world in just 2 weeks. So this ash is here to stay, here to affect the entire world. That means in the couple of weeks it takes Percy to show up to his own funeral, the ash is probably there. Or it would be there if it wasn't blocked up by Camp Half-Blood's protective shield. Okay, but the other damages include knocking out trees and wildlife anywhere between 9 and 20 miles of a radius around the volcano. They would have blocked sewage systems, shut down airports, damaged cars, damaged buildings, just all around made a bunch of people sick and killed a lot of wildlife. Also, a very fun fact, Percy almost freed Typhon from his jail. Typhon was literally designed by Gaia to be a 100-head fire-breathing dragon to get revenge on the gods for her. So that makes matters all the worse. So we're ranking this off the charts, son of the sea and earthquake god level destruction right there. But as a bonus effect, because this would have caused minimal environmental effects considering everything's basically dead in Tartarus, we're gonna look at Percy poison bedding a whole river to try to choke a goddess. So in House and Hades, when Percy is fighting Eccles, which is literally the goddess of misery, there is one major environmental effect from this. Percy could have very potentially almost killed her. Emmeth begs him not to, and it's described that she probably would have survived and snuck away anyway. If Percy had actually killed her in the end, he would have literally taken misery out of the world. We saw what happened when we even locked up Death. If he had killed Misery, he might have gotten rid of all misery in the world, at least temporarily until someone else stepped up to do it. Are we really going to hold Percy Jackson responsible for melting ice caps and keeping misery in this world? Probably not. In honor of Percy's birthday, how instead we just go out, have some blue food, and enjoy Percy Jackson? Because, you know, it is a fantasy book. Maybe Percy never did any of that stuff. Maybe it's all magic and the gods cleaned it up after them. Probably not. But you know, it kind of takes the fun out of the series when you try to hold Percy accountable for misery being in the world and for the ice caps to be melting. If you're interested in buying Percy Jackson, I have a link down below to The Lightning Thief, the very first book in the whole series, the book that started it for most people. If you're like me, you accidentally read The Lost Hero first. So have fun eating your blue food, maybe not watching Percy Jackson the movie, listening to Percy Jackson the musical, and reading, once again, the Percy Jackson books. Have a great day!